Chapter 37, Dropping Out of the Mob. Rene Boxer Enriquez heard the clop, clop, clop of cowboy boots coming down the corridor toward the holding cell where he was waiting. The clopping stopped in front of the cell door, and there stood the sturdy cowboy turned prison guard. He was about Boxer's age and had a slightly receding hairline, brown hair slicked back on both sides, and a full, rusty-colored mustache. There was no slouch in his posture, and he exuded an air of powerful confidence, a recognizable quality of leadership. Boxer thought he looked sharp. Also, he could see the big, silver rodeo belt buckle highlighted through the slot door. There was a cowpuncher sloped over the saddle and an engraving that read, "End of the trail." Boxer stood and walked to the door. Against policy, an open palm reached through the slot, and he felt the officer's firm grip as they shook hands. Their eyes met squarely. "Boxer, I'm Lieutenant Madrid," he announced. "Rene, please," came the response. "I don't go by Boxer. I never liked that name. What's on your mind, Lieutenant Madrid?" "Well," said the lieutenant, "I'm going to tip my hand here, but I think it's worthwhile." He sat down in a straight-back chair next to a small table in the corridor and told Rene to take a seat. Madrid pulled out a small can of Copenhagen chewing tobacco, grabbed a pinch with his fingers, and dropped it into his mouth. Boxer settled back onto the toilet, using it as a stool. Madrid tapped his tobacco can against his other hand, as if trying to figure out what to say next. Then he threw out a verbal lariat. "Rene, I think you're in trouble." "I'm not in trouble," Enriquez said defensively. "I want you to understand right now, I'm not in trouble. I don't need anybody's help." Mexican Mafia machismo went into overdrive as he coolly denied even being a carnal. His steely eyes didn't betray the lie, but his hands were trembling. He was in trouble all right, and he knew it. Madrid explained that he had been monitoring visits and had detected that Boxer was ready to leave the Mafia. "I don't have a damn thing on you," the lieutenant assured him, "but I remember you 10 years ago, and I'm looking at a different man today." "What do you mean by that?" "I profiled you. Not another Mafia guy alive who has money, helps put their kid through college, and sends gifts to family members on the right days." Madrid had no doubt that the man who sat across from him through the metal door was still a warrior. He felt that this mafioso had seen enough blood and had come to realize he was fighting on the wrong side. The lieutenant was careful not to use the name Boxer. "Rene, I think you're ready." Madrid's instincts told him that this bull ride was about over as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder. Pushed play without saying a word, and Rene, Boxer Enriquez, heard his own voice play back to him. "I'm so fucking bone-weary tired of this shit." Unmistakably, it was part of the conversation he had a few days earlier with his trusted confidant in the Pelican Bay visiting room. He heard the click as Madrid turned off the recorder. It served as punctuation before the western drawl continued in a direct and reassuring manner. "Call me stupid or crazy," said the lieutenant, "but you want to drop out of the Mexican Mafia. Rene, let me take you out of this. You don't want to be this anymore, do you?" No one had ever approached him like that. It was disarming. He looked down at his sweaty hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. Enriquez was truly frightened by what he was about to do. He'd been involved with La M for more than 20 years. It was the heart of his entire adult life. The devil had owned his soul, but the Mafia had a lease on it. "The shit out there in prison doesn't scare me," he told Madrid. "You scare me. I don't know what the other world is anymore. Let me take you there. I'll show you. What do I have to do?" Instantly, he noticed a gleam in Madrid's eyes. He knew he had me. He caught me at the right moment. Enriquez wanted some assurances. They moved to Madrid's nearby office, and Boxer noticed the lieutenant's secretary sitting at her desk had a look of fear in her eyes as the Mafia kingpin entered her safe haven. A call was made to the Special Services Unit offices in Sacramento, and Enriquez spoke with the SSU director and special agent Devin Hawks. Rene had known Hawks for years. He remembered him as a young investigations officer when Pelican Bay first opened in 1989, then as a sergeant, correctional counselor, special agent with SSU and gang specialist. Hawks was a sincere, soft-spoken, trustworthy man who had planned on being a geologist before he was sidetracked into the Department of Corrections. His own upbringing in a dysfunctional family, a series of stepfathers, and a sister lost to drug addiction, perhaps had prepared him well for a career devoted to making things right. He was also smart, a nemesis for Laeme. "Renee, I don't believe it," said Hawks. The news that a manipulative, murderous Boxer Enriquez was ready to drop out of the Mexican Mafia was not that easy to digest quickly. "I don't believe it either," offered Renee. "How do we know this is real?" wondered the skeptical SSU agent. The Boxer part of him was a little pissed off by the response, but he understood. He also liked Hawks and wanted him to personally do his debrief. Madrid would join the more experienced SSU agent throughout the process, mostly acting as Renee's handler. Enriquez wanted immunity from future prosecutions, but Hawks' smooth, non-threatening style of interrogation had him already given up certain information on the telephone. Suddenly, Boxer snapped back into a defensive position and tried to broker some kind of a deal, making demands. As he would readily admit years later, "I saw too many movies." Hawks softly explained the debriefing process to him. CDC policy mandated that Miranda warnings were not given to inmates who debrief, so that information handed over to prison staff is only used administratively, not for criminal prosecutions. According to the Department Operations Manual, the purpose of a debrief is to obtain sufficient verifiable information from the subject which adversely impacts the gang, so the gang will no longer accept the subject as either a member or associate. A debriefing is not for the purpose of acquiring incriminating evidence against the subject. Also, the debrief is designed to convince prison staff that an inmate has truly dropped out of the gang. That done, staff is obligated to place the inmate in protective custody and keep him safe from possible retaliation. After the phone call to Sacramento, Renee asked what to do about the belongings he still had in his cell. Madrid told him that correctional officers were already moving it to his new quarters. It was comforting, remembered Enriquez. He took control of it. It was almost as if he were saying, "I've got you, Renee." He was protecting me. I was befuddled and felt like crying. The emotion was lumped up in my throat, he said, like a big chunk of indigestible meat. The lieutenant walked him back to the holding cell in the prison administrative building, personally unlocked the door with the key, and shook hands. Then, in total violation of prison policy, the legendary crook and the ex-Marine cop embraced. They'd known each other for an hour and already felt like they were longtime friends. Boxer Enriquez had dropped out of the Mexican Mafia. Renee Enriquez had realized there had to be more to life than wasting it. It was 11:20 a.m. on March 22, 2002. The news of his defection shot through the prison as quickly as a round from the guard's Mini-14 rifle. Lieutenants and captains had been buzzing in and out of the office when Renee was talking to the SSU agents on the phone. Later, as the escort came to take him to his new cell in protective custody, there was a stale sense of dread. Madrid was there to shake his hand again. "You're making the right decision. It will change your life." Other cops came by and told him the same thing, assuring him that what he'd done was going to save lives. Already, Renee wasn't so sure. He was internally shaking as he headed down the corridor to the protective custody block, 150 feet away. "I didn't want to go there, didn't want to be a PC, but I wanted to get it over with quickly." Conflicting emotions were tearing him up inside. Renee had asked that the corridors be cleared so inmates couldn't by chance see him. That didn't stop prison staff from looking. Every door was filled by a curious cop or two. He felt dirty and ashamed. The distance he had to travel was only 50 yards, the width of a football field. He felt it was the longest, most shameful walk he ever took. That night he couldn't sleep. The next day, he tried writing out some of his mafia history for the coming debrief, but he snapped. "I'm not writing this shit," he told himself. Madrid came to see him at noon, and Enriquez noticed him first, stopped to talk to a young correctional officer named Rivers Drown, who was a devout Christian. The youthful guard was the gunner on the tier and had a military bearing that soldiers would describe as squared away. He was also a member of the Special's Emergency Response Team, CERT, at the prison, a SWAT-like unit that was headed up by Lieutenant Madrid. Rene, minutes later, felt the water well up in his eyes as he met with Madrid and angrily told him he made a mistake by dropping out of La M. He felt terrible. "I don't know why I did this," he told the lieutenant. "I think I made a mistake." The boxer ego began to think he was tricked into making the decision. Later that day, Rene heard the opening pop of the heavy metal door that kept him in his cell. Officer Drown, the young gunner, called him over to the gun booth that overlooked the pods. Rene looked up, and the gunner's hand reached out with a personal note. It read, "My wife and I are praying for you. You took a bold step in your life. I know your family is in danger, but you did the right thing. People care for you. P.S. I'm on Madrid's crew." He added that he didn't know if Rene wanted to talk or not, but he would be available to chat. The hardened convict's throat constricted with emotion, and he couldn't say a word. He turned and walked back to his cell, barely making the short distance before he broke down crying. "No cop had ever talked to me this way," Rene recalled. "He reached down into my soul. He said he prayed for me, and I didn't even know him. I was touched deeply by the kindness of his gesture. However, it wasn't enough to sustain any belief that he had actually done the right thing." The old boxer personality fell deep into depression. He was a proud mafioso, schooled to be hard-hearted, an addict conditioned to blind his emotions with drugs, a carnal trained to beat any bout with sensitivity, and a soldado required to fight back tears. Now, the walls of his protective custody cell couldn't shield him away from his own tortured feelings. In the darkness of night, tears dampened his pillow as he cried like a man who had lost everything. Words of regret ripped through his sleepless mind. "You just destroyed yourself. You are nothing now. You gave up everything. Why did you do it? You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to do it." His knife had always been a security blanket. It was almost an appendage of his prison being. He never left his cell without it, and it was always close by when he was locked down. A couple days after dropping out, he had flushed it down the toilet along with his handcuff key, believing he wouldn't need them anymore. Now he felt stripped. There were anxiety attacks when he left the cell to walk with Madrid, to take a shower, to work out in the mini yard attached to his pod. "I would almost panic," remembered Rene. "Everywhere, always, I had a knife. Not anymore." In the days that followed, gang investigators showed him he'd moved to the top of the Mexican Mafia hit list. He knew that the rule was blood in, blood out in his deadly universe. "Nobody wants to die," he said. "I'll do everything to protect my life. But it's the total rejection that bothered me. My entire MA career, I'd worried about being placed on the lista, that I would be ostracized. Being placed on the lista means the organization is rejecting you. It's a terrible feeling to be ostracized from a community that is already ostracized from society itself." Also, the boxer alter ego knew he would lose his crew, the money it generated, and all the respect and power he'd gained as an upper echelon de facto leader in the mafia. He feared that there would be nowhere to go for acceptance, and that he would end up as a nutty as Tupi Hernandez. A voice from a cell located to the left of him came through the ventilation system. "Hey Rene, you're going to be alright." It was an inmate named Richard Rich, aka Richie Rich, a dropout from another prison gang called the Nazi Lowriders, NLR. He had long hair down to his shoulders, boyish good looks, and no tattoos. Richie Rich came from Fontana, a town an hour's drive west of Los Angeles that had seen organized Ku Klux Klan activity as recently as the 1980s. "You're going to go through this depression for a while," uttered another voice from a cell to the right. That one belonged to Buckethead, a fat, heavily tattooed, more than mildly obnoxious NLR dropout who came from Orange County, a comparatively conservative Republican part of Southern California that spawned pockets of an active racist skinhead movement. Richie Rich and Buckethead began what Renee would later describe as NLR therapy. The two had dropped out of the NLR about 6 months earlier and were familiar with the mood swings Renee would encounter in the days ahead. Their therapeutic advice echoed through the vents with regularity. This is a footnote on the bottom of the page. Similar to the relationships between Sureños and La M, the skinheads are fodder for recruitment by white supremacist prison gangs. Because most of the Aryan Brotherhood members were locked down in Pelican Bay Shoe, the NLR developed on mainline yards throughout the California penal system. In 1995, the CDC validated Nazi lowriders as a bona fide prison gang threat, along with the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, and the Aryan Brotherhood. What about the BGF? We know you were an MA big shot. The worst stuff will happen in the first few days. We're all of the same status here. No one will judge you. They shared their own psychological journeys and walked him through each stage of emotional healing. It was actually very cathartic to talk to those guys, maintained Renee. They were effective, knew exactly what they were talking about, and I found it very comforting. Then, on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after he dropped out, he awoke from a much-needed deep sleep with the sharp realization: you don't have any more worries. It's over. That's it. No more mafia politics. No more anxiety about whacking people. No more jostling for position. The world is going to be okay. Suddenly he felt great. The mafia was truly a pack of predators who inevitably found prey within their own perimeters. Clearly, he was free of that twisted, bizarro existence that confused right and wrong. Some would forever see the black hand on his chest as a kind of scarlet letter, but that was their problem, not his anymore. Renee was full of regrets, but the remorse tank was running on empty. I have a sense of guilt for participating in some things, especially the murder of Cynthia Galvedon, but for the most part, these are heinous, horrible, brutal criminals who are getting killed by other criminals. I don't feel any sympathy for those guys. Maybe it's a rationalization on my part, trying to minimize or compartmentalize my crimes, but I don't have any remorse for those guys. It's a brutal world. Then there's too much room for compassion. On June 5th, more than 2 months after he dropped out, Special Agent Devin Hawks arrived to handle the official debriefing. I knew Devin had integrity, said Renee, and he had an uncanny ability to tap into informants. He already knew secret information about me, things I did for the mob, and he knew his stuff. The debrief took several days and eventually filled more than 50 pages of information related to the Mexican Mafia, activities, murders, assaults, extortions, robberies, burglaries, and drug deals. It listed almost 500 names of MM members and their associates. There was no going back now. During the first few months, Enriquez met daily with Madrid, giving him an in-depth education about La M. He described different codes that mafiosi used to communicate secretly, how visits were set up to conduct MA business, and how the business was conducted with crews in the streets. He translated tape mafia conversations recorded in the visiting rooms and gave advice on which carnales to target as potential MA dropouts and how to reel them in. There were meetings with the warden, an FBI agent, a U.S. attorney, a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy who worked gang intelligence, and a collection of other California Department of Corrections investigators. Lieutenant Robert Marquez, a gang intelligence expert at Pelican Bay, said, "It was the first time we had an MA defendant who could lay it all out for us. We never had anyone before of Renee's stature." He explained how MA infiltrates different organizations, uses inmate rights to advance their own agenda, and manipulates our rules in the prison system for their own benefit. We began to understand how it works for the first time. He went beyond what is required of a normal dropout. Renee had more than a few suggestions on how to interfere with MA operations. 1. View the Mexican Mafia as an organized crime and a domestic terrorist group. It's not just a prison gang, warned Enriquez, or just a bunch of guys shooting heroin. It's an organization. an organization that foments violence, spreads the cancer of drugs, has influence with tens of thousands of sureños, calls the shots on who lives and dies, and plans to expand its reach. It corrupts everything it touches, added Rene. 2. Shut off mafia communications. He suggested that the CDC seek injunctions to prevent MA members from communicating with other mafioso associates or facilitators. This would include no telephones, no correspondence, and no visits. You have to shut down all communications, said Rene. 3. Totally isolate MA members in prison. Rene suggested housing them in an area separate from all other inmates. Place them in such isolation, he said, that they can't talk to anyone but prison staff. Take them away from the camaradas and sureños who do their dirty work for them. 4. Prevent MA members from receiving money. Every bit of money they have, stressed Rene, because they value their money and it's all generated by illegal activity. 5. Seize the funds MA members have in their prison trust accounts. This is all legal money, said Rene. Mafia members get money orders and personal checks from $50 to $500 a pop on a monthly and sometimes weekly basis. It's cumulative and goes right into a prison trust account. They fill out a form called the Trust Withdrawal Computation and then are entitled to release money to anyone of their choice. It's the perfect method to cleanse money, he explained. There is so much money leaving and entering the prison, tens of thousands of dollars moving on and off the books on a regular basis, dirty money that is laundered with the help of the CDC system. Rene invested his drug tax dollars in U.S. Treasury bonds, CDs, and E Series U.S. saving bonds. Then he redeemed them later as clean money, all through the prison trust account. He and other inmates legally set up interest-earning bank accounts at Bank of America in Crescent City. Some mafiosi even play the stock market. Every cent of that money is criminal money, asserted Rene. Small fortunes of laundered money used to purchase homes, commercial real estate, and small businesses. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out a mafia member is receiving money from illicit sources. And no inmate keeps $20,000 on his books for bubblegum and candy bars. 6. Prosecute MA wives, family members, girlfriends, and other facilitators who aid and abet mafia crimes. These people are knowingly participating in MA activities, delivering drugs and messages, and the mob could not conduct business without them. They are strong co-conspirators. Not indicting them is like partially treating an illness, taking half your antibiotics and not killing off the infection. Prosecuting their wives and loved ones is a deterrent. The one thing we do fear is our families being hurt, people we value going to prison. That's what we fear. 7. Prosecute all in custody for criminal conduct, including murders, even the cold cases. Rene noted, there are numerous incidents of murders, assaults, and narcotics trafficking each year that go unprosecuted. An MA member understands he can sell or imbibe drugs or kill his cellmate and get no punishment except for a disciplinary report in his file. He already has an indeterminate shoot term because of his mafia affiliation. So what else can the system do to him? We, MA, have the sense that no one is going to prosecute, so let's do it. There's an air of impunity in the mob, that we're the ultimate authority figure in the gang subculture and nobody can stop us. 8. Seek capital punishment for murderers. What's really needed is the ultimate sanction because a lot of carnales are simply incorrigible and irredeemable. Another life sentence does nothing. One life sentence in California is as good as 10 life sentences. So what's the difference if I pick up 10 more along the way? The mafia only understands and respects a violent power greater than them. It's the biggest bully on the block mentality. We'll kill you, but if there's a bigger force that can kill us, maybe we'll hold back. However, I don't believe that the death penalty is a deterrent for future Mexican mafia members. It might be more of a deterrent in Texas, but not in California, where a man can sit on death row for 20 years or more. He could die of old age, hepatitis, or get stabbed on the yard before the state kills him. There's no immediate threat of dying here. It's politicized. Furthermore, The publicity from further indictments and trials for heinous crimes can even enhance a mafia career. In fact, dying from a lethal injection at San Quentin might place the recipient into legendary M status, a carnal dying for the cause. But here's the bottom line on the death penalty for prolific Mexican mafia murderers. The only way to stop them is to kill them. They are wholeheartedly involved in the furtherance of M and his criminal objectives. That means murdering people. So these are carnales that have such a low value on life, even on their own lives, that they are willing to sacrifice themselves for other brothers who are ultimately going to betray them. And here's the point. What good is there in keeping people like that alive? After all, that's how we do business. The mafia rectifies everything with violence. I mean, mafiosi try to negotiate and intimidate. But if Emmett has a problem with the guy and all else fails, we ultimately kill him. Renee made an hour-long videotape presentation at the request of his CDC handlers to play for state legislators in Sacramento, spelling out the threat of the Mexican mafia and how it all works. State and local gang investigators had expressed their concerns many times before, but Rene Boxer Enriquez, an articulate upper echelon Mexican mafia killer, started to command the attention of CDC bureaucrats in Sacramento. He also made a video clip for La M's Angel Valencia. Rene's instincts told him that Angel too had had enough of mafia politics. Basically, he told his old adversary that it was over. Mafia politics destroyed everyone. Mafiosi knew Angel was part of a plot to kill family members, and there had been plans to execute him during the phony PBSP peace talks in 2000. Gang investigators pulled Valencia into a conference room and showed him the tape. What? He joked. I'm supposed to drop out because of a videotape? Then he did. After 25 years in the mob, it was as if all he needed was an invitation. During the same time period, David Chino Delgadillo of Garrity, Lomas, an ex-Marine who had used his military training to teach others how to kill on the streets and in prison, dropped out of the mafia after 20 years. He had a final run-in with MF fanatic Cuate Grajeda. 3 high-ranking Mexican mafia members had dropped out within a month, and all were now advising CDC gang intelligence officers on how to break La M. One PBSP gang investigator said, "We wanted to deliver a death blow to La M, at least knock them back for 10 or 15 years. We knew we could do it by seizing their trust accounts, cutting off communications, visiting privileges, and mail. At the same time, we'd house them separately from Sureños and the rest of the prison population. They would become a wilted flower and die."